right, in this video, we are going to go into Chapter 8, Articulations or Joints. So in this first video, we're going to have just a little introduction to it. So joints are just simply the common name for the scientific portion of the body that we call articulations. Uh, they are simply functional connection between bones. So this is the very simple definition of it. And most of us right now probably think, oh, I know joints, the wrist, the elbow, whatever. But there's some types of joints that you might not think of and as joints, and they're kind of important. So they bind the skeletal system together. They make growth possible. This is going to be one of them that is kind of a shock to people that it's a joint, but we'll get to that. It permits parts of the skeleton to change shape during childbirth and enable body to move in response to skeletal muscle contraction. This is the one that we really think of as a normal joint. Now, joints themselves can be classified into two different ways. We're going to look mainly at the structural classification. So we'll see this as we go through. Fibrous is held by fibers. Cartilaginous is held by cartilage. Synovial is its own little ball game altogether. And so most of the chapter as we go on is going to be about these synovial joints. But in this particular slide, what I want to look at is this functional classification. It is a pretty, it's not a very clearly defined thing on some of these, we'll see, but this is about whether the joint can move or not, or how movable it is. And it goes from immovable on one end down to freely movable on the other. And so there are three classifications. Synarthritic is the first one. Now, syn and pseudo are kind of similar parts to the prefixes. It means false. A synarthritic joint is one that is considered immovable. Now, this is what I mean when I said it's hard to kind of define, because even the most immovable joint with enough pressure can end up being movable, even if it means it breaks the bone. So I just want to make sure that you know that it means that for most instances it's not going to move. We'll look at the sutures of the skull, which we've already named in the last chapter. Those are a type of synarthritic joint, but there's a whole process where people are able to kind of help get that moving and stuff. So anyway, just want to bring that up. But synarthritic joints are considered immovable. Amphiarthritic joints are considered slightly movable. That means that they don't move a lot, but they might just give a little bit. The prefix amphi, to not use a scientific way to describe it, but kind of use the normal language of the day kind of use, it means so-so. Amphi means it's not really one or the other. It just kind of move, it might move a little bit, but it might not. For instance, an amphibian is an animal that's both in the water and on land. It's not confined. It's so-so. So amphiarthritic simply means it's sort of movable. And then finally, the last one, which is what we end up looking at in synovial joints, because all synovial joints are this, they are diarthritic. Diarthritic means freely movable. And so one way you can kind of remember what the names of these is, it makes you sad to remember them. All right, SAD, synarthritic, amphiarthritic, diarthritic. And those three are the functional classifications. Now, again, I'm not going to spend a lot of time on this at this point, that functional classification. I hope you know it at that, and we're going to move on. So now we look at the structural classification, and the first one we look at is called fibrous. So fibrous joints are held together by dense connective tissue, which is another way of saying fiber, containing many collagen fibers. All right. Now, before we go much farther, I want you to know that if I have a muscle and a bone, the thing that holds them together is called a tendon. All right. If I have a bone, and again, remember I'm having to use the mouse pad to do this. If I have a bone connected to a bone, this is called a ligament. All right. Tendons tie muscles to bones. Ligaments link bones to bones. All right. So most of what we're talking about here is going to be some sort of tendon. It's a dense connective tissue containing many collagen fibers. And there's three types. And we're going to look at these just briefly. Again, I'll show you the one that I definitely want you to know, but I'm going to go over them anyway. I got to go over all of them, but just while we're sitting here, the suture is going to be the main one, the star of the show here. Now, there's going to be a question or two on the other ones, but the suture is what I definitely want you to know. Syn, we just said, means false. Desmosis is talking about the fact that it doesn't have a joint cavity. All right, and we'll get to that about the when we get into synovial joints. But these are just sheets of dense connective tissue, and they are going to just be kind of tying or linking these bones together. Again, ligaments link, and they form amphiarthritic type joints, which just means they're designed to give and move a little bit, but not too much. So this is a sign of a syndesmosis joint. So in between the tibia and fibula, I have this little band of tissue, and also this one. You do not have to know the names of these, but I'm just pointing them out that these little tissues are designed to keep those bones close together. And but it still allows a little bit of movement. So for instance, every time you step, there's a little pressure wave that goes up here. These little ligaments allow for the tibia fibula joint between them to expand a little bit to help ease off some of the pressure that is caused by every step. So a syndesmosis joint, like is in here, it's holding the bones together, but allows them to give just a little bit in order to be a pressure release. So the next one, and the one I definitely want you to know some stuff about, is a suture. And you should know this because we just went over it in the skeletal chapter, the last chapter. These are considered synarthritic joints. They're considered immovable, but they can move some. But anyway, you should know where these are. There is a sutural ligament is what connects them. It's a ligament that connects the sutures. I mean, pretty straightforward. Gomphosis is the third type. Gomphosis is kind of interesting, and it's considered a synarthritic, an immovable type joint, but it is what holds the teeth, the roots of the teeth, in either the maxilla or the mandible. So for instance, these are the sutures, right? And again, you're pretty familiar with them. You don't need to know this right now off of this picture because it doesn't show it all, but this is the lambdoidal suture. This is the sagittal suture. On this, for the gomphosis joint, one of the ways you can remember it is if you lose this joint, you have to gum your food because this joint is what holds your teeth in. And so anyway, I hope you get that little joke, but the thing that holds the tooth into this joint is called the periodontal ligament. I'm going to assume most everybody knows what the word periodontal means. It means basically you think of it as someone dealing with teeth. So the periodontal ligament is what holds the tooth in. So after those three, now we get into cartilaginous joints. Dear Lord, I hope that if I just say what's between the two bones in this, you know that it's cartilage. That should be a pretty easy one, right? So cartilaginous joints, there's two types. These are held together either by hyaline or by fibrocartilage. Now in this, the two that we're looking at, one's hyaline, one's fibrocartilage, but I will tell you again, with anything, if you have no clue and it's talking about cartilage, guess hyaline, because hyaline is the most common type of cartilage. Now in this, if you do it, you got a 50-50 shot, but as long as you remember it's hyaline. So there are two types of these cartilaginous joints. The first one right here, so number one, is a syndesmosis joint. It's a false joint made of cartilage, syndesmosis. Again, this one is hyaline. Now, there are two places that they use this, or they talk about it. One is the first rib and the manubrium. I am not worried about that one. I mean, that's that is kind of an interesting one, but the one, because we just got through talking about it, is this epiphyseal plate. All right, I kind of circled over it a little bit much. But anyway, the epiphyseal plate is a type of syndesmosis joint. I actually have the epiphyse on one side and the diaphysis on the other. And this little joint that's between them, that's made up of hyaline cartilage, is a joint. It is between bone on one side and bone on the other side. So it ends up being this separating, even though it's synarthritic, not movable, it is a joint because it's cartilage between two bones. So it is a syndesmosis joint. And it kind of means it's a cartilage joint that wouldn't be normally considered a joint. So hopefully that makes sense. But that's what I want you to remember it as, the epiphyseal plate. And then the second type is called the symphysis joint. Now, the symphysis joint is going to be hyaline cartilage, basically. Or not, geez, I'm sorry, this is not, this was talking about something else, is fibrocartilage is what I want you to remember. This part here, articular surfaces covered by hyaline cartilage, is just saying that where it becomes a joint, I have hyaline cartilage on the outside, but it is a fibrocartilage joint. It uses fibrocartilage. I hope that makes sense. They have limited movement, right? And there's two main places, the intervertebral discs. Now this again, if you remember, this fibrocartilage was the tissue that had the really red, it looked like a really red sunset on a really blue ocean, underneath it. That was the fibrocartilage for us at Horry Georgetown Tech at Grand Strand. So I just want to make sure you remember that. But this I used as intervertebral disc for you to remember it, and that is fine. But I will tell you there's now a better one I want you to remember, and it's called the pubic symphysis. And the reason I want you to remember this is because it tells you what type of joint it is in it. It is a symphysis type joint. And so as a symphysis type joint, that is between the two pubic bones, pubic symphysis. So this, again, uses this for a syndesmosis. It uses the little first rib, but again, remember my example is going to be the epiphyseal plate. And this, again, on this side, the symphysis joints, this is what we kind of talked about with the intervertebral disc, but this little joint pad right here is the one I would tell you to remember it as, because it tells you what the name of the joint type is. Pubic symphysis is a symphysis joint between the two pubic bones. And so the last thing we'll look at, and we're just briefly talking about it here because the rest of the videos basically are going to be about these joints, is synovial joints. So we have three types of joints. Fibrous joints, there's three that you need to know. Cartilaginous joints, there are two that you need to know, and these synovial joints. Now we're going to get into, again, what makes a synovial joint, but the joints we think of are synovial joints. All synovial joints are diarthritic. And when I say the ones we think of are synovial joints, I'm talking about elbow, wrist, ankle, knee, hip. These are synovial joints. The big thing about the synovial joints is they have a joint capsule. None of the others do. The joint capsule is what separates synovial joints from other joints. Now, on this, I will have articular cartilage that's going to cover the ends of the bones that are coming together to form this joint or articulation. And again, when we get in, these next ones, we'll see about the joint capsule. Again, the joint capsule is going to have two layers, an outer and an inner layer. And we'll see what all that entails. But that's the basics of joints. So we've got three types and kind of the basic idea of those three. Anyway, I hope that all makes sense, and I look forward to seeing you in the next video. Take care.